Twitter stock had been crashing for a pretty good while until just a couple days ago when the stock skyrocketed off of the news that Elon Musk had purchased about 10% of the company, making him now the largest shareholder of Twitter. And the market seems to really like this move for a couple different reasons. Of course, Elon Musk is famous for building up super popular and very successful companies like Tesla and SpaceX, but also because in recent years, especially, Twitter has been controversial for its censorship practices. And that's something that Elon Musk seems to be very much against. So if he was to come in and implement changes to their policies, well, that might attract more users to the platform that had previously felt alienated. But will Elon Musk bring that same success over to Twitter and turn this into a high-flying stock that is worth investing in? Or is all of this just overhyped PR for what is still an overvalued stock that is not really worth buying even at today's levels? It's a good question. Let's try to find out together. What's up everyone, my name is Ale. Welcome back to my world of stocks. And this video might get a little tricky. It's kind of hard to navigate these type of topics that can be a little controversial. People have strong opinions on this type of stuff. I always try to keep everything unbiased, non-political, so I'll do my best to do that. But let's just try to keep the video as simple as possible. We'll pull up the stock chart. We'll take a look at what exactly is happening here. I'll share my thoughts on what I think it means for Twitter's business, especially going into the future. And of course, as always, I'll let you know if I plan to buy Twitter stock myself anytime soon. So let's go ahead and dive in. Okay, so just starting with the past week, we can see that huge spike of over 27% on Monday following the news that Musk was buying the stock. But even here, it's still down 35% from its 52-week high. And that's because this is a stock that was already heavily struggling up until the Musk news. If we zoom out to the past 10 years, we can see that Twitter has always been a very volatile stock. It was actually crashing heavily up until Trump became president, and we later had the pandemic, both of which increased engagement on Twitter because everyone was constantly tweeting. They were arguing over politics, arguing over social issues, health issues. All of that type of stuff was causing a lot of, people using the platform, a lot of engagement, and that drove up ad rates and it kind of helped them. But that sent the stock, all of that stuff sent the stock skyrocketing up over $80 a share before it started to crash again once all of the pandemic hype died down and the lockdowns mostly ended and people stopped spending so much time on their phone. And of course, Trump had long been banned already from Twitter well before that. And so the stock was kind of boring and started crashing again. And Twitter as a company wasn't really doing anything exciting to lift it back up. That is until they received the Elon Musk bump this past week, where it started climbing again. Valuation wise though, you're talking about a stock that trades for a forward P ratio of over 55, and even their price to sales ratio is very high too at almost 8. These are very expensive metrics, and I'll show you some comparisons later in the video to give you some context for that. But just that high P ratio alone, that should be a red flag. And when you look at their financials, the story is mostly the same. Even with the increased engagement during the pandemic and the higher advertising sales resulting from that, Twitter still posted a loss in both of the past 2 years at hundreds of millions of dollars each in the red. And even if you want to give them the benefit of the doubt that they had special fees or maybe stock-based compensation or whatever other excuse you can think of for that negative net income, well, you can just look at their raw operating cash flow. Both years were in decline, and their free cash flow was also negative last year by hundreds of millions of dollars too. My point is that it's not exactly a company that is on fire right now. They definitely do have their struggles. Now, on the bright side, analysts do think that things are turning around and that some very nice growth is coming their way, which should dramatically lower that valuation over time. For example, revenue is expected to grow by 18% this year and still another 22% next year as well. That's pretty good growth. Earnings per share are also expected to average 80% growth per year in the next 5 years. And at that rate, that PE ratio will come down, quite a bit. In fact, it's expected to fall to 44 by the end of this year and below 20 in just a few years after that. That's really not too bad, and as a result, most analysts actually think that the stock is fairly priced around these levels. Out of 34 analysts, the average price target is right around where the stock is trading today. For me, though, I'm just not feeling that excited about Twitter. They've done the same thing for years now. I really haven't seen much innovation from them during this time. And if anything, they've actually implemented policies that are pushing certain users away rather than attracting more customers. And I'm not trying to get political here, and I'm not talking, morals and ethics and all that type of stuff. I'm just saying that from a business and from an investment standpoint, I don't really think that they're making the right decisions by censoring a lot of people. Twitter constantly gets accused for censoring people, especially from the right side of the political aisle. Again, not getting political, just saying what the reality, what the facts are. That's where a lot of the criticism comes from right now. And just to give you an example of how this can affect the business, well, when they banned Trump, he was the sixth most followed person on the platform with close to 90 million followers. And whether you like him or you hate him or whatever else, he was really the only gigantic figure from the political right at such a high ranking. So he was really someone that attracted a lot of users from the right, which led to more engagement because it allowed the two sides to, constantly argue on Twitter. And from a business standpoint, you want that engagement, as bad as it sounds. Now, on the other hand, Twitter was probably worried that regulators would come down heavier on them if they didn't censor more. So maybe you can justify some of their moves from a business, standpoint. But regardless, my only point is that I don't really think that it's good for their business when you censor or try to silence so many people, because it ends up hurting your growth. It encourages competitors to pop up like, Parler or Getter or the Truth Social, those type of things. And ultimately, you just lose engagement, and that's not really good for sales. At least that's just my opinion. But then after all of that comes Elon Musk, who, I don't know if you guys have noticed, but many people, especially conservatives, are kind of praising him right now because they feel that he's going to be their free speech savior that will change, and shake things up at Twitter and make it more attractive to more users. But is that true? Will Musk actually change anything? And if so, does that make this volatile, mostly failing stock all of a sudden a buy now? Well, let's dive deeper. So in the past, Elon Musk has made very critical comments about Twitter's censorship. And just last month, prior to his purchase of Twitter stock, he tweeted a poll saying, "Free speech is essential to a functioning democracy. Do you believe that Twitter rigorously adheres to this principle?" And then in a reply to that, he also tweeted, "The consequences of this poll will be important. Please vote carefully." Well, in that poll, over 70% of the more than 2 million voters said that no, Twitter does not adhere to free speech principles. Of course, the consequence that Musk was referring to in his tweet was probably him deciding to buy Twitter stock later. But before we look at that, he also tweeted the next day saying, "Given that Twitter serves as the de facto public town square, failing to adhere to free speech principles fundamentally undermines democracy." And then he replied to that tweet and asked, "Is a new platform needed?" Well, as you know, he ultimately decided not to create a new platform, but instead he did proceed to purchase over 9% of Twitter, which was worth almost $3 billion, so pretty big investment, and that did now make him the largest shareholder of Twitter. And surprisingly, that's not all that happened. Twitter later announced that they will be adding Musk to the board of directors, and Twitter's own CEO tweeted the news saying that after having conversations with Musk in recent weeks, it is clear to them that he would bring great value to the board. To which Elon replied saying, "Looking forward to working with Parag," that's the CEO, "and the Twitter board to make significant improvements to Twitter in the coming months." That's pretty crazy. And at first glance, I gotta admit, this does actually look pretty damn exciting, even, not just from free speech, but also because he's talking about making improvements to Twitter as a platform. Could be all kinds of technological differences. Of course, he tweeted later about adding a edit feature, and there's just all kinds of different things. Twitter also said that they were already working on that, but you get the point. Elon Musk will probably push the boundaries and push for innovative moves. So that does sound like some big changes could actually come. However, before anyone gets their hopes up, you should also know a couple more things that the media isn't really giving a lot of attention to. First of all, Twitter did agree to let Musk be on the board, but it comes with the condition that while he is on it, he is not allowed to buy more than 15% ownership of the company. That to me sounds more like Twitter is scared of Musk and they're trying to limit how much change he can actually have on the company. In other words, you let him be on the board, It gives you some of his popularity and notoriety. You get some attention. You let him have a voice on some issues, here and there, but you mostly keep your core policies in place. And all the meanwhile, you prevent him from being able to gain more control of the company by not allowing him to buy more of the stock. And that's actually not that crazy of a conspiracy theory. I mean, Twitter CEO is acting friendly to Musk right now, but the two are actually very different in my opinion. And I wouldn't be surprised if they end up clashing heads in the future, which could actually hurt the company and make for a volatile stock. See, Musk, and I would even argue that Jack Dorsey to some extent, who was the previous CEO, they've always spoken positively about freedom of speech. But Twitter's new CEO, Parag, he's very openly against basically free speech, and he's accelerated bans and censorships on the platform since taking over. To give you an example of some of his views, back in 2020 in an interview with MIT, Parag said that the company is not to be bound by the First Amendment. I mean, that alone is a pretty big statement, but he also went on to say, our role is to serve a healthy public conversation, and our moves are reflective of things that we, emphasis on we there, believe lead to a healthier public conversation. So, in other words, they will continue to heavily monitor and censor tweets in the way that they see fit themselves. Now, to be fair, he doesn't have an easy job. So, let's be at least kind of fair here. And you do have to also ask yourself the question of where exactly do we draw the line on censorship? Because obviously, there are things that should not be allowed on social media. I can't talk about those things here on YouTube, but generally, things that involve like kids, that would be one example of stuff that should not be allowed. And I think you guys all know what I'm referring to. But my only point is that for everyone that thinks that Elon Musk is going to completely change Twitter and all of a sudden it's going to be a high growth platform again, I'm just not so sure. I think that board of directors is going to be heavily divided, and that may not be a good thing during a time when Twitter's growth is actually slowing down. When looking at their user growth coming off of the pandemic, in 2020 it exploded to 27% growth, but then dropped in 2021 to just 13%, which to be fair, that's still pretty good. But the alarming part is that that really just came internationally because their user growth in the United States was only 2% last year. And that group of users actually brings in more than half of all their sales, despite it only being less than a fifth of all their users. So, in other words, you're still seeing growth internationally, but that's not where they make the bulk of their sales and profits. And here in the United States, where you desperately need more users for Twitter's business, well, they've decided to heavily censor and really anger, like half of the population with their policies. And even if Musk is able to change those policies and attract more users back to the platform, I just think that stock price itself is still too high when compared to other options in the market. So, for example, two social media related companies that I already own myself are Google and Facebook, or I guess, Alphabet and Meta, but you guys know what I mean. And both of them are incredibly cheaper than Twitter. On a forward P basis, both of them are less than half the ratio of Twitter. And not just that, but even by paying a cheaper price, you also get way more in return. I mean, don't get me started on how much more diversified and reliable of a company something like Google is, but just on an operating cash flow basis, Twitter did 0.6 billion last year, while Facebook did 58 billion and Google did a gigantic $92 billion. I mean, they're not even in the same universe. It's like 100 times more for both of them and a lot more for, Google. So at the end of the day, do I think that Elon Musk actually brings any value over to Twitter? Yes, absolutely. I do think so. He has proven time and time again that he can turn a company into a giant success. And I think that Twitter stock itself is much more attractive today than it was before the announcement of Elon Musk, joining the board and having an ownership stake. Twitter stock is now kind of exciting again. It's got a little mystery to it. Elon Musk may bring a lot of innovative ideas over. He's someone who really pushes the boundaries, is not afraid to take risks, and that's actually something that I think Twitter really needs. Plus, on top of all of that, he may actually be able to influence some policy changes as well, which may be more attractive to a wider pool of users. All of that, I think, is good news for Twitter. Now, do I think that he's also going to clash a little bit with the already existing board of directors and the CEO and everything else, and it might cause for some drama and maybe some inefficiencies within the company? Yeah, I do. But I still think that Elon Musk is a net positive for the stock. And if you want to buy the stock just because of the Elon Musk factor, I don't really see a problem with it. Twitter stock is not a bad stock. I think long term it'll probably do well. And now with Elon Musk adding some surprise, some mystery to it, some excitement to it, kind of causing a little bit of a spark for it, I think all of that is good news for Twitter stock. I can definitely see why people would want to own it. But at the same time, when looking at it for me personally, I already own Google, I already own Facebook. Do I want another social media company and one that is going to cause me a headache and one that I'm going to have to stay on top of? I know it's going to be a volatile stock. I know I'll have to keep track of it. Look, if you're trying to make short-term moves, if you like the volatility, if this is something that you think is just really exciting, again, because of that Elon Musk factor, then it might be the perfect stock for you. But for me personally, like I already have a big enough headache just owning Facebook stock with them trying to go into the metaverse and everything that's going on there. I don't need another social media company that I'll have to constantly keep track of, constantly following the volatility, following the drama, and trying to stay on top of it. So I'm going to pass on it myself just because it doesn't really fit me personally. But at the same time, I'm going to monitor it without all of the stress of actually owning the stock. I'm just going to monitor it. I'm going to watch it, track it. And look, if Elon Musk starts to actually implement some changes here, if he has a real voice and they start to listen to him and Twitter all of a sudden starts becoming more innovative and they start taking more risks, then absolutely I will want to buy the stock. If you're asking me, do I want to own a social media company that is controlled by Elon Musk, I would be 100% all in on that. I would definitely buy that stock. The problem is that that's not where we're at right now. Elon Musk is still a very small player in this. He might become larger over time, and I'm going to definitely be looking for that. But as of right now, it's still just too speculative, and I wasn't that interested in Twitter stock to begin with, so I'll be on the sidelines for this one, guys. But I'd love to hear what you guys have to say down below. Do you own Twitter stock? Are you thinking about buying it? Drop those comments down there. I'll try to respond to as many as I can. Thank you for watching the video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope I did a good job for you, but I'll catch you in the next video. Take care. Bye-bye.